What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. I asked you to send me the mistakes that you think the FPL community are making, whether that be specific player picks or strategy, whatever it is. I've got it in this video and I'm going to go through and talk about whether I agree or disagree and why. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, let's get into the first potential mistake. So first potential mistake, trying to cover Palmer with Nkunku when they play Man City in game week 1. Having a plan to include Palmer in the following week seems more logical. Couple of things to tackle here. First of all, if you're only buying Nkunku to try and cover the points that Palmer might get, that in my opinion is a mistake straight away. Attacking coverage is an absolute myth. If Palmer goes and scores a bunch of points, you don't get a percentage of them because you own Nkunku. You only get points if he assists one of Palmer's goals or if Nkunku scores off of one of Palmer's assists instead. So don't worry about coverage, in my opinion. The only decision really is I've got 6.5 million to spend on a midfielder. Is Nkunku the best option? If yes, put him in your team. If no, don't. Whether you own Palmer or not doesn't even come into it. Palmer's a separate conversation about how to fill your premium midfield spot if you've got one. In terms of the Man City game in game week 1, of course you'd rather have a better fixture. It's not ideal, but there are more than just one game week in FPL, and you're obviously setting up your squad at the start for the first 3 to 4 game weeks at a minimum. Some people might even be looking longer term than that. And I will say, I don't think the Chelsea fixtures are amazing. There's a lot of away games early on, but after City, Wolves away, Palace at home, Bournemouth away, West Ham away, Brighton at home, Forest home is not that bad, given what Nkunku could potentially deliver FPL-wise. So I'm not really that worried about the Man City game. And with Palmer, yes, you can have plans to pre-book transfers to bring players in. And Palmer's great, but I don't think he's a level above the likes of Saka or Son. So in my opinion, the decision on whether you own Palmer for those good fixtures after Man City should be made now. And he should be in your squad if you want him. We know he's been late back to pre-season because of the Euros. But I'm sure he'll be starting for Chelsea sooner rather than later. So if you want him, I'd have him in game week 1. Otherwise, go for Saka or Son or Salah, whoever it might be, and just see what happens after the first few weeks. But in my opinion, pre-booking a transfer for Palmer is not really needed. If you think those fixtures are good enough, he should be in straight away. So here's the next one. People looking at the fixtures as if they're more important than good picks. And there was another comment about how it's a mistake to obsess over fixtures. And look, you probably shouldn't obsess over anything in FPL, but the idea that fixtures don't matter, I just find a little bit weird. Ultimately, what makes a good pick is made up of a few different things. If I'm looking for my ideal player, they always start, they always play 90 minutes, they're on penalties, good attacking stats, and the fixtures are good. It's just another piece of the puzzle. Why would you ignore that? It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I get there's a balance to be had. If Haaland has average fixtures, he's probably still better than most other FPL players with great fixtures, but you'd still think about it, right? And whenever someone says to me stuff like form over fixtures, etc., here's what I say. If you could handpick your fixtures for this week, would you choose Arsenal away and Man City away? The answer almost certainly would be no. Why? Because they're difficult fixtures and you'd rather play Leicester at home, Southampton at home, Ipswich at home, whoever it might be. Therefore, it is important. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider what attacking output a player has and stuff like that, how good a team's defence is, but fixtures still is a part of the overall puzzle. So I absolutely can't agree with this one. So I just wanted to quickly talk about Fantasy Football Hub. If you haven't already checked them out, make sure you do. Most of you will be playing around with different drafts during pre-season. If you want to get an idea of how they're looking ahead of game week 1, you can get them rated for free over on the website or the dedicated app, which I'm showing you on screen, by using the link in the description below. As well as giving you a team rating, the My Team tool will also let you scroll through different game weeks to see how the team is going to be looking in the long term, as well as showing you predicted points. And if you're stuck for transfers or if you just want a second opinion, you can also ask it to recommend you a transfer, which is super handy once the season starts. If you want to make use of that and all the other tools they have on the app and website, there's 50% off at the moment. And if you sign up and don't win your mini league, you will get your money back. Terms and conditions apply for that. I'll leave links for everything in the description below. So this next one says, I believe that players returning to clubs late will surprise many. some big names might not start the first 2 game weeks. And I agree that it's a mistake not to be thinking about these things when you're making your game week 1 picks. Hopefully, over the next week, we'll get more information from managers about player availability, and we can keep an eye on those final pre-season games, which I'll cover in next week's videos. But as an example, right, you've got Eze at Palace and Gordon at Newcastle. The thinking is that, yes, they were away with England until quite late, but they didn't really play many minutes in the tournament, so they should be fine. But up until now, at the time of recording, they haven't played any pre-season games for their clubs. So unless they get good minutes in the final one, there is a chance that they might just miss the first game week, and that might be all that it is, but that's still something to consider when making your choices. Like, can Newcastle beat Southampton at home game week 1 without Anthony Gordon? Of course they can, right? So they might give him a chance to come off the bench in that game, build up a bit of fitness, and then have him in from game week 2. It's going to be hard to know for sure, but that's the kind of thing that can happen. I would also say that it's okay to start with the odd pick that might not play in game week 1 if you've got a deeper bench where you can play someone else instead and just have that pick on the bench. So Eze, for example, right, if I really wanted him, but I didn't think he was going to start in game week 1, if I've got 11 other players that I'm happy to play, I could just have him benched and ready to go in game week 2 onwards. Of course, you could set up transfers to bring those players in that you want. Not necessarily Eze, right, but anyone here that went late into the into the international tournaments. But there's only so many transfers you want to use on that stuff. And so I think for the most part, I'm going to try and ignore those players and go for players that have played, a lot during pre-season. Like, if I look at the team that I've got at the moment, this is slightly different to my last draft video, but not massively. I'm looking at this squad. Apart from Eze, and I guess Trent as well, he didn't play a huge amount of minutes, but he was away late. Most of these other picks have had a pretty good pre-season. Not necessarily all of them, but most of them. And so subconsciously, I am thinking about that. We've already heard that Pep say some players will be reintroduced slower. I'm sure that'll be the case at other clubs. I don't think it's going to be like a massive problem where they miss like game weeks 1, 2, and 3. But the opening weekend is going to be a potential problem. And more so if they played a lot of minutes and they're not as important to their team's success, if that makes sense. Like an Eze at Palace, for example, he's one of their best players. He didn't play much of the tournament. I think there's a good chance he would start game week 1 if he's fit and available. Whereas for a Foden, okay, it's Chelsea away, it's not an easy fixture, but Man City can get by without him. He is obviously good, but the step down from him when you bring another player in is not massive. So those are the things we're going to have to consider. Like Van Dijk's going to go straight into that Liverpool defence. Could they get away without Trent for one game? Possibly. So it's difficult to know for sure, but hopefully we'll get more information. Also, just quickly, I understand why people are looking at game week 4 wildcard. Very aggressive. Try and not make any transfers for the first couple of game weeks. Target the fixtures. Ignore anyone that was away on international duty. And then between game weeks 3 and 4, you've got an international break. The transfer window will be shut. And everyone will be settled at that point in terms of getting back into their team after their kind of summer playing football. So game week 4 wildcard, I kind of get it. I'm still probably not going to do it, but it does make a bit of sense to me. So having a premium price point in defence, midfield and your forwards is something that goes a long way. Most drafts do not have that. So if you want a premium in each position, you're looking at Trent, Salah and Haaland. And the idea is that you can move to any other player in one move because they're all cheaper. And likewise, if those 3 players do really well, you're not scrambling for transfers to get them in. Whereas other people like me, for example, if I'm only going to go for one of Salah or Haaland, if I want the other one, it's going to cost me 2 transfers at least, maybe more, to shift the funds around. So that's the idea behind this theory. But I don't think I can agree that it's a mistake because the prices have just gone up this year. It's more difficult to build a draft with these premium players than it would have been last year. Like, even though the price of all 3 combined was the same last season because Haaland was $1 million less, Salah was the same, and Trent was $1 million more, but other players were so much cheaper. Saliba, Gabriel were $5 million, Saka wasn't $10 million. Palmer, okay, we didn't have him in game week 1, but he started off at $5 million. So it was much easier to have all those players in. So it's not a mistake if you only want to go for 1 or 2 of Trent, Salah and Haaland. And also, see if I can explain this without making it sound complicated. I think to have these 3, you've got to make sacrifices. And if you absolutely nail the value picks like 4.5 million defenders, 5.5, 6.5 million attackers, you're laughing. But it's much more difficult to do that in game week 1, to know who's going to be the value pick long term. And if you get it wrong, you're still going to have to spend transfers. You're not necessarily in a better position. And it's more likely that for the 7.5, 8.5 million attackers that you get it right. Because although they might not go, crazy in terms of the points they get, they'll probably get you something and keep ticking over. So in theory, this sounds great. I can go to anyone I want. But what if it's Fernandes and Odegaard and Son that start doing really well? Well, yes, you can get to one of them in one move, but you can't get to all of them. You've got to start spreading that money around that you now have from selling Salah or selling Haaland. And also, it's not easy to sell those players, by the way. Once you've got them, the fixtures are good. Even if they're not performing, you might want to keep hold of them. So it could work really well, but someone could have no premiums and also do really well because they've spread their money around. And on average, the players in their team are just better quality. And you can only captain one player every week too. So Salah or Haaland, okay, you can rotate captaincy between them, but you can only go for one. And permanently captaining Salah or Haaland is fine, right? And captaincy is not the only reason you pay big money for these players, but it is a factor. So, yeah, I think you can build a draft with these three, which will probably do okay. But I think most people on average will do better if they spread their money around a little bit. So I'm still not going for all three of these players, I don't think. I might change my mind, but it's definitely not a mistake if you're not setting up like this. So people are wasting 4.5 million on a second sub that they won't play before wildcard in game weeks 4 or game week 6. Now I agree, if you're dead set on wildcard early and nothing's going to change your mind, you can be a bit more aggressive in terms of how you set your squad up. So you take money off the bench and put it in the 11 instead. Because if something major happens, you can bring the wildcard window earlier, or you can just use a transfer. And if you're taking out a player that you know you're going to want back soon, it doesn't matter because you're going to wildcard and you can just bring them back in then. So in that situation, sure, go for a weaker bench. If you're not sure about that, or you want to think a bit longer term, I still think generally in the FPL community, a strong bench is kind of underrated. There's a few reasons why you might want different options there. One might be that the deadline passes, all of a sudden a player misses out we didn't know about, you've got someone good on the bench to come in. It might be that you've got a defender or an attacker in your main team, which is great long term, but in one of the weeks they've got a terrible fixture, you can have someone on your bench to come and play instead, hopefully maximising your points. It might be that in game week 1, someone that went late into the Euros is not going to play, but they're going to play from game week 2 onwards. So you have a good bench option that you can play instead. There's lots of reasons to have that deeper bench, and it can often result in fewer transfers and fewer hits as well, because you're not forced into making a transfer straight away when someone gets injured, because you've got good options off your bench. So I think it really depends on what your thoughts are in terms of chip strategy. I'm really not nailing down a specific week that I want to go for it, because I feel like if I do well in the first few weeks, I'll just delay that wild card until later in the season. So I prefer to set up with a strong bench. And by the way, I'm not saying you have to spend 6, 7, 8 million on your bench players, right? That's impossible. But having like a good 4.5 million defender, maybe a 4 million defender that's going to play, and if you can stretch to like a 5.5 million attacker, that's probably enough, right? No one's saying you have to spend more than that. Even just 2 playing subs would be good. So it really depends on what your strategy is. But I agree, go aggressive if you're wildcarding early. That's part of the reason to do it, right? Because other people like me are thinking longer term. You can really target the fixtures and put all your money in the 11. So this is about defenders, and apparently the mistake is going for defenders who have more chance of clean sheet points rather than going for attacking returns. And that does sound a bit odd to me when we're thinking about defenders. I mean, it's a bit like the fixture conversation earlier. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You want to figure out which teams are going to keep a bunch of clean sheets and then buy the most attacking defender from that team that you can afford. But I still think when I'm considering defensive options, I'm thinking clean sheet first and then trying to get the attacking returns on top of that. And also with the bonus point changes this year, it's not a huge difference in how points will be allocated, but there are minor changes for defensive players in that if you get an attacking return but concede, you're less likely to pick up bonus points than you would have been last year. You need those clean sheets for the bonus points as well. So ideally, you want it all, right? You want the clean sheets and the attacking returns. But I still think when I'm considering which players to put in my squad, I want those clean sheets first, and then the attacking decision is made. So like if I pick a Fulham defender, I'm going to go for Robinson because he's nailed on and he's pretty attacking. If I go for an Arsenal defender and Gabriel's starting regularly, I'm going for him over Saliba. If I can afford Porro over the other Spurs defenders, I'm going for him. But if I was happy with the rest of the squad and Spurs had excellent fixtures, I wouldn't necessarily downgrade someone else just to get Porro. I might just go for Van der Ven just to cover the clean sheets instead. So I'm not sure I agree with this, but like always with FPL, it's not necessarily black and white. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You're trying to get both. So this next mistake is overthinking on certain players and trying to be different when I should be playing it safe for the first couple of game weeks. Just a side point here, where possible, and I'm terrible for this, we got to stop using words like template and safe and boring for picks, because usually when someone says they're going for a safe pick, it's someone that they're expecting to score points. That's ultimately what they mean, and therefore that is a good pick. But in general, you shouldn't be trying to go different for the sake of it. If you've got two players that could both score really good points and one's really low owned, then absolutely you could go for them as a bit of a differential. And if they do really well versus the other player, yes, that might increase your overall rank and stuff like that. But again, and I feel like saying this is so stupid because it's obvious, but we all overthink it. The points is all that matters. You don't get bonus points for having a low-owned player that does as well as someone that's really highly owned. Right? I've said that before. So yes, you shouldn't overthink it. If you're looking at two players and one is going to absolutely smash it, but it's the safe pick or the boring pick, that is the one that you should go for. And I'll tell you now, from experience of playing this for over 10 years, this next week is going to be chaos because through pre-season, you will have considered pretty much every single player there is to consider, and you're going to be trying to fit them all in. You're going to forget why you went for those picks in the first place. And in a lot of cases, it's worth just going back to those first couple of drafts and asking yourself, why did I pick those players and why are they not in my team now? It could be that new information has arisen, right, about availability, about a certain player is going to start now because someone else is injured. It's fine to change your mind. You don't get bonus points for owning a player since July 17th, but go back and think about why you're changing it. And yeah, don't overthink on players. You don't have to be different. So I'm seeing so many people fascinate over Salah and Haaland, but they're forgetting Arsenal. In my opinion, they look fantastic, have players fighting for positions, and will be full of goals. Now, I can't disagree with most of that. I think Arsenal will be top two again this year. Maybe they'll push Man City all the way and go and win it. Who knows, right? But either way, lots of goals, lots of clean sheets. But that doesn't mean that they're the best options for our FPL squads. As stupid as that sounds. And part of the tweet said they've got players fighting for positions. Now, for Arsenal, from a footballing point of view, that's really good. Strength in depth is going to push players to want to keep their place. For FPL, all I'm hearing is there's minutes risks. Like, who's going to start on the left? Martinelli, Trossard, Jesus? We just don't know. So for me, those players are automatically just not in my thinking. If you start from the top, Havertz, if he plays number 9, he's a solid option. But there's only 3 forward spots, and straight away I'm thinking I can get Isak for 0.5 million more. Probably as good as minutes, plus he's got penalties. And if I want Haaland, I probably can't also have Havertz. So he becomes then a little bit of an issue from that perspective, that there's players at 7.5 and 8.5 that could be just as good. But could Gabriel Jesus also take minutes off him in that number 9 position? It's possible. And if Havertz plays deeper, I'm not as interested. So I'd probably rule him out. Odegaard I've spoken about before. I won't go into great detail. But if it's him or Fernandes for an 8.5 million midfielder spot, I'm going for the guy with penalties. I don't think Man United are better than Arsenal, but that doesn't necessarily matter for an FPL pick, right? I mean, some people, will put comments every now and again saying, that team's going to win, that team's going to lose. Ultimately, we don't really care. Of course, if you think someone's going to concede, it's not great for a defence, but FPL points are all that matters. If someone walks away with a 10-pointer in a game they lose 4-1, who really cares for FPL specifically, which is obviously what we're talking about here. And Saka, I love the guy. He's brilliant. But if there's doubts over him starting game week 1, you probably just go for someone like Son, who's had a full pre-season. So at some point this year, I'll absolutely be tripled up on Arsenal. And lots of people will be from game week 1. And rightly so, they're a good team. But I think you can make a case in most positions to look elsewhere. Like Raya in goal probably is the best long-term 5.5. But spending 4.5 on a goalkeeper is a strategy that a lot of people go for season after season. And then defence I've spoken about a lot. They probably will be the best defence in the league this year in terms of limiting chances and right up there for clean sheets. But Villa, Spurs, Man City away in the first 5 game weeks. Saliba doesn't have a huge amount of goal threat. He's now 6 million. And Gabriel, I'm like 99.99% confident will start the season and probably play most of the games and could do for the whole season. But at some point, who knows if we don't see like Ben White, Saliba, Calafiori and Timber play in a game where they're going to have a lot of the ball, and Arteta might want players who are better in possession. Because Gabriel's a great defender, but maybe not so good in possession itself. So I think Arsenal are brilliant, right? They're one of the best teams in the league. They will be this season, but it doesn't necessarily translate to FPL points. On the flip side, if you want Saliba, Saka and Havertz in your team, they're not terrible picks. But just because they're Arsenal doesn't necessarily mean they're the best FPL options. So this person's put a few different potential mistakes in one tweet. So trusting pre-season way too much, too many risky players, so risky minutes or injuries, and then team bias, avoiding players due to rivalry. So let's go through them one by one. With pre-season, we probably do put too much emphasis on the wrong stuff sometimes. Like ultimately, who's scoring and assisting is not necessarily a big indicator of what's going to happen once the season starts. Like ultimately, clubs are usually playing without their complete first 11. They're playing against weaker opposition. And even if they're playing good opposition, the tempo and the intensity is not usually the same as it would be in a Premier League match. So who scores and assists and doesn't or does keep clean sheets, not a huge concern. You more want to be looking at who's getting the minutes, because that's a good indicator of fitness and obviously minutes once the league starts, what positions they're playing in and stuff like that. Right, and it is easy to be influenced. We've all done it, myself included. Porro's now in my draft. He scored a couple of goals during pre-season. Rodgers at Villa, he was in a lot of drafts early on because he scored, I think it was 3 goals in 2 games. But he went a bit quiet after that, so he's getting less spoken about. But actually, we should revisit that Rodgers pick because not how many goals he's scoring, but if he's getting good minutes and that's going to continue, he's only 5 million. So we should start thinking about him again. So in terms of trusting pre-season, I think it is important to look at what happens, but who scores and assists the most goals is probably not a major factor. We already know which players are likely to be good. In terms of risky players, I fully agree. Having basically, I would call them like hassle-free players that you know are going to play. They're injury-free. They always get good minutes. That can just make it easier to manage your team longer term, and actually makes it a bit easier to jump on new bandwagons, right? If I set my team up with players I know 100% going to start every single game, yes, going back to that word, it's boring. But if someone suddenly starts doing really well and I want to go for them, I can do it knowing that I don't have to worry about the rest of the squad. So the less risky players you go for, it actually means in some ways you can jump on those better value players later on. And obviously injuries and who's going to start game week 1 because of international duty and stuff like that, we've got to keep an eye on it. And then team bias, absolutely. Now, ultimately, you should play the game that you find the most fun. If you're an Arsenal fan and you don't want any Spurs players, and that's the rule you've set yourself, or vice versa, whatever it might be, fair enough. But if you want to do the best at FPL, you should take those biases out of the equation and just pick whoever's going to do the points, right? The most points. I'm a Man United fan. I'm happy to pick Arsenal, Man City players because ultimately it's just about FPL. It doesn't mean that I want those teams to win, but I know their players are going to score me a lot of points. Leave a comment below with any mistakes that you think I've missed out that people are making. If you've enjoyed that, give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars on podcasts and check out Fantasy Football Hub using the links in the description below. Otherwise, I'll catch you again tomorrow.